This girl spent 13 years tied to a chair in a room. What we just saw is a piece of a short video I made for another platform. But I found this story so shocking, it caught my attention so much that I thought it was important to bring it here with more details for you. For 13 years, Susan, or Jeanne Wiley, was treated like an irrational animal. She was kept locked up and had practically no human contact. And when she was rescued from her captivity on November 4, 1970, Jeanne couldn't speak. She was only able to make a few sounds, like a baby does, you know? She weighed only 26 kilos at 13 years old, wore diapers, and had clear difficulties with movement and eating. The most shocking thing is that the person responsible for this abusive, inhuman treatment was her own father, supposedly based on a diagnosis of intellectual disability that the little girl received. When she was born, her mother was visually impaired and completely neglectful. But the worst part is that her so-called saviors weren't really her saviors. And so, once again, she wasn't treated properly as a human being. I'm Marcos Campos. Everyone is very welcome here. Every week we have new episodes, so if you like true crime mysteries, I invite you to subscribe and follow the channel. Look, your subscription helps a lot. It really helps us maintain our episodes and our productions. And what also helps a lot is if you can join our members club. But if you can't right now, that's totally fine. Enjoy our content, share it with anyone interested, and stay with us until the end of the episode. And look, everyone, abductees, dear ones close to my heart, before we continue with today's episode, I need to take this moment to give some thanks, some special thanks. The first one is, without a doubt, to each one of you who gave me fantastic support, such positive energy. With all the recent changes the channel went through, I admit I was scared. You know what I mean, guys? I was genuinely anxious with a lump in my throat when I shared in my stories that I couldn't sleep. I meant it. I was really anxious, really scared because the channel is our source of income now. Others are involved too. I said, man, changing the name will hurt us. We'll have to start over. And it was completely the opposite, right? The video did really well, you guys, you know. Great response, very positive. I was super happy. It really took that weight off my shoulders, you know. So, I really wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I also wanted to sincerely thank our commercial advertising partners here. Without them, guys, the channel wouldn't exist, you know? I know that sometimes when we put in an ad insert, you know, a lot of people don't like it, right? Because it interrupts the flow of the story, but it's essential, guys. I also watch a lot of channels here on YouTube, okay? I love a lot of channels, and every time I'm watching and the guys put in an ad insert, I say, man, that's cool because I know that's what keeps the channel I like running, you know? We can't always keep the channel going just with YouTube AdSense. So the commercial partners, the companies that advertise here, they're really essential for our content to exist. So I wanted to thank those companies. I wanted to quickly tell you in just a minute about something that happened. The day we changed our name, we finalized a partnership with Growth Supplements. On that day, we changed our name, but the trackable link and coupon were already created. And then we had to talk to the people there, told them, hey, we changed our name. It even sounds crazy, right? They were like, what do you mean? We had just finalized the partnership and changed our name. The team was very receptive and changed theirs too. Now, all our coupons are Marcos Campos altogether, okay? So at Growth too, for those who don't know, Growth, just quickly here for you, is a supplement company. There you have vitamins, whey protein. Go check out the Growth website. I'll leave the link for you in the description. Let me know and use code MARCOSCAMPOS for a special price. And you'll also be supporting the channel, right? Because by using our code, that's it then. That's really all. I wanted to thank everyone. Your feedback was fantastic. That's it. We're done. Messages delivered. Let's get to the facts. The story of Genie Wiley is without a doubt one of the saddest I've ever told here. I came across this case the other day when I was researching episodes, you know, stories for the episodes. And the cruelty with which this girl's life was treated really touched me, you know, guys? I don't know if it's because I'm a father, and after I became a father, I became more sensitive. This story is really sad, so get ready. It might make your throat tighten. I decided to make the short video we saw at the start of the episode because it felt right. I also spoke to Eliana. I thought we should create a fuller, more detailed story and share it with you all. So, we investigated the origins of this perverse behavior by those responsible for Jeanne. And look, this is nothing new, okay? You must remember, as true crime story experts, the case of Oksana Malaya, who is a Ukrainian girl who became known, actually worldwide, in 1993 when it was discovered. Then, the way she was treated by her parents too, which turned her into a wild child, a girl who was treated like a dog. She lived with the dogs. If you don't know this story, we presented it here on the channel in the series Don't Be Silent, which was a series of episodes we did here. About treatments, cases, right? Cruel ones involving children and teenagers. But focusing here on the case of Genie Wiley, then, according to the documentary Jeanne, The Secret of the Wild Child, from 1994, which features accounts from Jeanne's mother. When the girl was born, her pediatrician informed her parents that the baby showed signs of a mild intellectual disability, which would make her learning a bit more difficult, especially when it came to speaking. And this led Jeanne's father to want to protect her from society. So he decided to keep the girl isolated from everything and everyone. But here's the first question in the case. Was it really like that? It's unlikely that this information holds up against the facts we're about to see now. What comes to mind when you read this? What was the father trying to do? Would that actually be to avoid embarrassing people with his daughter present? Yeah, he just didn't want to embarrass himself with anything that could happen with the girl, right? A man who only thought about himself and his own needs and put himself first in any circumstance, completely disregarding other people. Even if that hurt those people, and in this case, even if it ruined his own daughter's life. So to start, let's get to know this guy, a Cidade Brasil. Clark Wiley, Jeanne's father, was born in 1901. He grew up there in the California region and worked as a machinist in Los Angeles during and also after World War II. The man married Dorothy Irene Oglesby, and despite being a controlling individual who hated noise and didn't want children, he ended up being the father of 4. A girl who died after being left in a cold garage. A second baby who died due to complications during childbirth. The third, a boy John who survived and 5 years later came into the world. Then, Susan, the girl who became known worldwide as Jeanne. After Clark Wiley's mother, Mrs. Pierre May Martin, was accidentally killed by a drunk driver in 1958, Clark developed a permanent state of anger and paranoia. Apparently, that was even what led him to brutalize his children, little John and also Jeanne. And when the whole story comes to public knowledge, that's when we find out that it was around that same time that Jeanne's father started keeping her locked in a room. The child stayed in that room, which had a bathroom and her own crib, where the girl's arms and legs were kept tied and immobilized. Some sources also say that the father forbade anyone from interacting with his daughter. So, in little Jeanne's daily life, there was no room for any kind of stimulation that could help her develop. And since she received an insufficient amount of food, this also left her severely malnourished. The girl was physically malnourished from lack of food, emotionally malnourished from lack of affection, and cognitively malnourished due to no education or stimulation. Her father mainly fed her baby food and occasionally some boiled eggs and cereal as well as liquids. And there's an extremely cruel detail in this story, because Clark also forced his son to abuse Jeanne. Regarding the girl's speech, every attempt she made to express herself was made public. Did this create in her a permanent silence conditioned by this violence? Obviously, out of fear of being hit, of being beaten, the mother and brother couldn't talk to Jeanne. They were forbidden by Clark, and the neighbors didn't know either. They didn't even know the girl existed. Clark was so miserably inhuman that he told his wife that if Susan, whom we actually know as Jeanne, could live until she was 12, he would allow Dorothy to get help for her. And the feeling I get here is that he really wanted to kill Jeanne slowly, didn't he? But she somehow survived. In this condition of extreme cruelty, a long 13 years went by until she was rescued by a total twist of fate. Dorothy finally decided to leave Clark and took Susan with her. Fortunately, she went to live with her own mother in the neighboring city, Monterey Park. The woman also tried to apply for assistance for visually impaired people and thought that maybe she could request some support for her daughter, who was dependent. Jeanne Wiley was so malnourished in October 1970 when this whole situation was discovered that she looked like she was 3 or 7 years old, actually half her real age. On that occasion, mother and daughter entered a social services office in Los Angeles County. Since the woman was afflicted by cataracts that left her partially blind, she was seeking support for her disability. And so, she entered the wrong place. And then, unintentionally, let's say, she took her daughter to a meeting with social workers. The child walked in a very uncoordinated way. She would cross her hands in front of her body. She couldn't speak. She would relieve herself anywhere. She drooled and spat involuntarily. Jeanne was not able to focus her eyes or fully extend the limbs of her body. Jeanne would occasionally touch herself intimately without caring who was around. And although she would get upset in some situations and even angry, she never cried. The 13-year-old girl showed that she understood only her own name and 2 phrases, "Stop that and that's enough." In summary, the professionals who were there on that occasion were shocked by the child's physical, emotional, and psychological condition. Initially, they thought that Jeanne might have some degree of autism, but they quickly discovered that everything had been conditioned by her behavior and the abuse she suffered. Soon, the doctors confirmed her death. She could barely swallow or chew. Since she was little, as we've seen, she was forbidden to cry, speak, or make any noise. If not, she would be beaten by her own father, who would growl at her in these situations like an angry dog. Guys, it's a situation that maybe only people who have children can really understand. Imagine your child in a situation like that, a man doing something like this. It's heartbreaking, man. A child, poor thing. When you see the videos of the treatment she received, you can see that she was a child fully capable of developing. You know, when her psychologist and her teacher are talking to her, she imitates the sounds, she touches things. You can see that she's discovering the world. And then, when you think about that situation in that dark room where she was tied up, where she did her business, that must have smelled terrible. Isn't that really the smell of inhumanity? And maybe there's no other way to express it. But anyway, folks, faced with this shocking truth, Jeanne was taken to a children's hospital where doctors and researchers began to take care of her and subjected her to various tests. They believed that she could still learn to speak and develop normally. The child's care was divided among several professionals. Susan Curtis, who was a linguistics specialist, was responsible for Jeanne's language development. James Kent, who is a psychologist, was responsible for the girl's emotional development. Jay Shirley is a psychiatrist, and she stayed there with her team, conducting exams to assess the child's mental health after all that isolation. The results showed abnormal brain patterns, but it wasn't possible to determine whether this was due to the supposed congenital deficiency or to the years of suffering. If we consider that this innate condition really existed, the degrading treatment certainly must have made everything worse. Look, it's a mix of everything, isn't it? The girl at first could only say words like blue, orange, mom, and go, and for most of the time she remained silent. If she was forced to speak, she would urinate or defecate, which showed a great insecurity, extreme fear, and also stress. At the time when this story first came out, it was widely reported in dozens of newspapers in the United States and also in Britain. The full names of the parents and children were used, including their address. There was no attempt to hide any details of their lives at that time, nor to protect the girl's identity. Far from it. And the local reporters and editors even won journalism awards for all that coverage. Now I'm gonna talk about what all that coverage may have caused in Senior Clark's life. Remember him, the one responsible? But talking about Jeanne's treatment first, she overcame many barriers and learned about 100 words in the first year she was being followed. And she also showed a lot of interest in wanting to understand things and learn more. That's why Jeanne went to live with John Butler, who was her teacher at the time, and later she went to live with the couple David and Marilyn Higler, where she kept improving. With the dedication of these people and over time, Jeanne learned to express feelings and to use language to describe past events and abstract ideas as well. However, the girl still had occasional fits of rage, and the care that Jeanne received when she was found was quite complex, because there were some conflicts of interest regarding the way the professionals handled that case. And although they were not completely successful, we can consider that the efforts of the rehabilitation team were important for Jeanne's integration into society and for her achievement of autonomy, but mainly because they represented progress in her cognitive development when compared to the 13 years of complete neglect during which she lived locked up and isolated by her father. Even with all the attention the case received and the interest from the scientific community, Jeanne's progress unfortunately did not meet expectations. The researchers were now divided between those who believed she had an intellectual disability from birth and those who thought the abuse had caused irreversible damage. After almost 4 years, the government funding for all this research with her was cut in 1974 due to the lack of concrete results. The Higlers, that couple who took Jeanne to live with them, then left Jeanne and stopped being, in quotes, her adoptive parents. In 1975, with the end of the studies about her language, the main conclusions were that vocabulary development had no expiration date, but that understanding grammar did. Anyway, guys, this thing about making sentences and words, it was a very complex situation for the child. This developmental window seems to be limited between 5 and 10 years of age. And the criminal aspects of the case were also closed in parallel. Take a look. Clark Wiley, at 69 years old, was reported by his wife and accused of child abuse. However, on the day of his arrest, precisely on November 20th, 1970, he took his own life with a firearm, still inside his house. His 18-year-old son John found his father's body. Clark left behind a farewell note with the following phrase in quotes, "The world will not understand." So I ask, what did you want the world to understand, right, Mr. Clark? Remember when I said I'd talk about Mr. Clark? Was all that media coverage the reason, or what made him unable to bear it? He subjected his daughter to 13 years of a situation that can't even be put into words. We can barely imagine the suffering this girl went through, but we can't even come close to everything she endured. He couldn't even last a year with the weight of society on him, discovering the monster he was. Besides that, Jeanne's mother claimed that she also suffered abuse at the hands of her husband. She had severe visual impairment, as I mentioned earlier. And finally, she was acquitted of the charges of mistreatment. And later, she still tried to raise her daughter. When Jeanne was already 18 years old, that was when she returned to her mother's care. But Jeanne's mother later said she couldn't do it, right? Given the circumstances, she kept control and couldn't take care of her daughter. She also sued the researchers, claiming that Jeanne's well-being was neglected. Sadly, without her mother or the researchers, Jeanne started living in foster homes where she suffered new abuse and returned to complete silence. In January 1978, Jeanne's mother forbade all scientific observations and tests with her daughter, and little is known about her circumstances since then. Her current whereabouts are unknown, although it is believed that she is living under the care of the state of California. It was reported in 2016 that she was living in a state institution where she was approaching her 60th birthday. Her brother, John, who also survived years of abuse, last saw his sister in 1982. And Dorothy Irene Oglesby, Jeanne's mother, passed away in 2003. Psychologists and linguists still discuss the case of the girl Jeanne to this day. And there is special academic and media interest in her development as well as in the methods used by the research team. In particular, scientists compared Jeanne to other cases of delayed psychological development and late language acquisition. For example, the case of Oksana, which was mentioned at the beginning of the episode. And also the case of Victor Averon, who was a French boy found between 1798 and 1799 with all the characteristics of a wild child. The movie Mockingbird Don't Sing, released in 2001, is based on the story of Genie Wiley, a tragic account of parental abuse with extreme consequences that forever limited the girl's development. And they even put her at the center of various experiments of scientific disputes as if she were a guinea pig. And Dr. Susan Curtis, regarding Jeanne, analyzed the following, quote, "But is it only language that makes us human?" That's a complicated question because I believe it's possible to know very little about language and still be fully human and able to love, build interpersonal relationships, and interact with the rest of the world. And Jeanne definitely interacted with the world, end quote. And even taking advantage of what the doctor said, without a doubt, it's just like I said, when you carefully watch the videos that show the treatment Jeanne was undergoing, the treatments, she was a perfectly capable child who could develop. She had a sad look, but deep down, she still kept a child's innocence and she could develop. There's even a sad scene with her. When the researchers say that her father died, right? She looks sad with that empty expression, staring deeply. And then she turns to the darkness, but she's inside a hallway. Anyway, what a sad story, right guys? It's a really sad story. I told you it's one of the saddest I've ever told because it really is. Hope you enjoyed our content. If you did, like, subscribe, and consider joining our members club. Thanks for your company. Kiss from Revo. See you next episode.